It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, I am Rob, and welcome to another State of the Dungeon address. This is for the game that took place on the 14th of October in the year 2021. The game, The Darkest Dream, an adventure from GUI Cube for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. All players were present in attendance. The group was kind of at an impasse. They were dealing with 3 paladins who wanted the show to end to stop the corruption of the moral fiber of the villages. Well, obviously the group didn't want that and tried to be nice and ask the paladins to stop. But when their arguments fell on deaf ears, it was basically, no, we can be here. The people make their own decisions, etc., etc. Paladins didn't want to hear that, and 2 of them took out knives and went to start cutting down tents. The tent they went for, unfortunately, was one of the relic tents, the Tent of Illusions. Well, that's a no-go. The players were never going to let them carve that up. So they physically blocked the way, Crendon did. The rest of them tried various means to talk them down. This didn't work very well, and it looked like it might actually come to blows. Ventov tried one more pitch to try to get the whole thing to stop, but yeah, it just, his interpretation of the Wardane followers as being pacifists who willingly take blows for the innocents and common people wasn't quite accurate. And it was going to devolve into blows. They started looking around for help from any angle. And this discussion was bringing quite a bit of attention. Some of the other Hanatas were paying attention. But the only major NPC who came through, you had, of course, the old storyteller came up. He wanted to see what was going on. But it turns out Sunesi, the cook, was running across the camp getting things. And she saw this. And, well, she's used to putting recalcitrant children in line, we'll say. So she stood there and used all of her prodigious mom powers, ladle in hand, and she blasted that paladin, full-on mom power, putting her in her place. How dare you make such a scene, a devout follower such as yourself, you know, doing all of these things contradictory to your role and everything, and I was on a roll myself playing her, and everybody in the group was like, oh wow, and the paladin just kind of shrank down, and she turned to the paladins who were going to move to cut the tent, and she's like, and you, knives out, the tools of backstabbers and thieves, here making such a scene. They stopped. And eventually, the group kind of worked with that. They took the time that the paladins were on their heels and made every effort to make them unwelcome, to make them reverse their course. Eventually, working together, using the aid other ability, that helped them out too, giving themselves advantage, they were able to put forth enough force of will that they drove off Jillian and her paladins. Didn't come through test of arms, no blood was shed, no weapons really drawn. It was what it was. They managed to get through it. Sunesi really helped them out. But the group knows that trials like this that, you know, require quick thinking and everything, yeah, there were some misunderstandings of, you know, what exactly, you know, can go on in something like this, but for the most part, it was another encounter that the group had to try to, you know, wrangle some semblance of reason out of in a fairly unreasonable world. The group then, looked around at the available things, and they saw the Tent of Veils. They had not investigated that. The Tent of Veils, of course, is the purview of the spell dancers, and it's very popular, especially by unattached men and women who love them, who like to watch the spell dancers dance. It's the most expensive of the various treats that are offered at the Carnivalle, but due to the magic and enrapturing abilities, and of course, they're really pretty. The spell dancers always have a packed house, as much as the common folk can afford. And sometimes the higher-ups come in and end up quite a bit, because there's nothing quite like the Hanataz spell dancers. So they went over and they met Mavia, who was checking everybody had a token showing they'd paid to get in. Mavia is, she is beautiful, but she is a family member to the group. I mean, they know her, and her charms are impressive. But this is Mavia. For those of you who haven't seen the art, she is very pretty and exotic and all that. So she basically went and told them a few whispers that she had heard. But for the most part, the Tent of Veils, the spell dancers are more than capable of taking care of themselves with their magics and their natural abilities. People don't get out of line and rowdy with the spell dancers as much as they do some of the other events, like what happened at the old tree. So they didn't have to do any policing there. From there, they went to the Tent of Veil, or the Tent of Jests. Now, the Tent of Jests is a little different. It is primarily where the clowns of the group perform. And the Hanataz clowns have quite the get-up. Attractive, they're exotic looking, and they've got wonderful costumes. And the youngest of the, well, she's not truly one of their members yet, but Taylene is a clown in training. And they take their roles very seriously. They don't break character even outside of the Carnivalle. So Columbina and Zani, who are the clowns of the group, entertain the crowd with their antics and everything, and all the younger ones in training practice in the sideshow. And for the most part, it works pretty good, but Zani and Columbina they're not the most serious. They really take their roles as representing the mirth of Jinx seriously, by not taking things very seriously. But they were beckoned into the tent, and what a lot of people don't know is that behind the stage, there's a flap that separates it, and the shrines to the various gods that are revered by the Hanataz is behind that, which includes Brother Anton. Brother Anton is one of my favorite characters, honestly. He's so cool. And he is in a bit of a state because somebody had walked off with his candles, his religious votive candles, and the clowns weren't helping him any. They were mocking him. And that only made him madder and madder. Now, bear in mind, all the camp are familiar with the jests of the clowns. Again, they never break character, so they're never serious. They delight in whimsy and you know, making fun of themselves, but making fun of everybody. And Brother Anton wasn't having any of it while his candles were missing. He couldn't get anything out of them. The group, talking to them, eventually figured out that they saw the candles were up a tree, and they could go up in the tree and look. So the group promised that they would help out, and turned out that Glynn went outside and examined around and Several of the others kind of looked around for tracks, and they found outside of the tent there were little paw prints coming back and forth to the tent through a small gap. So they followed them to a large elder tree, and they decided they were going to examine it, which they did. They saw a little flash up in the heights of the tree. Now, Vanessa, of course, is a druidess. She determined, using her training, that the tracks that they had followed belonged to a slinker, a small weasel-like creature. Some of them can be rather exotic. They might even be the dimensional slinker, which has the ability to slip in between different dimensions and lair on another plane altogether. They're exotic, to be sure, and quite beautiful. Blue eyes and white gold fur, and So she had an idea. This is the kind of thing that would grab something that it noticed, like candles. So Glyn and Haranen decided they were going to climb the tree. At first, things started out okay, but then disaster struck. Glyn got a little bit higher and then rolled a natural 1. Hit the ground. Hard enough to hurt. Haranen was still perched up in the tree, and he looked up, and he saw a little critter. This was a dimensional slinker. Again, beautiful fur. Everyone got the aww, and with good reason. They are adorable creatures. But how to get at it? Haranen tried. He started climbing. But eventually, doom also hit him too. He rolled a natural 1. Even farther up, hits the ground. Okay, the two strongest people in the group cannot climb this tree. Eventually, Vanessa says, I'm just going to do it. Vanessa is not the strongest person in the group, and I don't think she's trained in athletics, really. But she scales the tree. No problem. She sees the critter. She talks to the critter. She makes her animal handling roll. No problem. The critter gives her a candle voluntarily. She sees that he's got the 4 up there. And she gets one from him. Then she starts promising him food and other knickknacks, and finally this little dragon statuette she lifted off of one of the dragon punchers. And it decided that that was kind of cool. So it traded 2 of the candles for the statuette. Okay. She promised that she would leave him 1 candle, though. Okay. So she came back down. She said, I got 3 of the candles. The other one's still up there, but he wants it. And the group's like, aw, that's too bad. But, okay. So they went back to the camp. They got the 3 candles to Brother Anton. And Brother Anton's like, those are expensive candles. Isn't there any, if you know where they are, isn't there any way you can get the last? And they're like, not really. The creature probably will fiercely defend it, and we kind of promised. And he's like, well, can you trade it for something it really likes? This is when Vanessa realized that they really, really, really like a particular seed. A seed that the Hanatas use in their cooking. So she went off to the food tent and asked the cook if she could have the seeds, which weren't selling all that well for the Hanatas. They're not a flavor that the people in Nevermore like. The people in Nevermore like sweet and spicy, and these nuts aren't the most sweet or spicy. So she got them, and she took it back, and she exchanged the nuts for the last candle, and it was very happy about that because it loved those nuts. So they got all the candles. Hey. Brother Anton was so happy he gave her a potion of healing. This might become handy. When they went out, the clowns were applauding them for what they had done, and in reward, Columbina produced a satchel, reached in the satchel, and pulled out a shield, which she presented to, well, right now, Vanessa has it. It is a shield with the clover symbol of Jinx on it. It is a lucky shield. So, I don't think she gave it to anybody. I think she still got it. So, so that was kind of done. So, they left. And they were kind of like, okay, what are we going to do now? We could go up to the gambling towns. We've explored just about everywhere, honestly. They missed the puppet show. It's okay. But otherwise, they made a pretty clean sweep of the entirety of the Carnivalle until they heard the scream from the other side of the tall tent. The group dashed off, and they found out that it came from the animal pens. There was a woman, distraught, in tears. People were scattering. Something had happened. They ran up, and Glenn got there first because he's the fastest of the group. And all she could say was, they took my daughter, and they took one of your daughters, Jovensa. And they did it. And she pointed back into the animal enclosures, and they saw that several sinkholes had opened up, and that a lot of the animals had been slaughtered quickly, just brutally cut down. So, examining things, they found out that that pit that the cow had sunk into earlier actually connected to a tunnel. And something came up out of that tunnel. Whatever that was, it grabbed one of the Hanataz girls, one of their youngstas, and a local girl, who happens to be the daughter of the alchemist. And this is Jovessa. She's a cutie. And she is now currently being grabbed by something vile. So the group realizes they gotta get into action. No time to go and grab armor. Fair. And quite honestly, when the night started out as bad as their dice were, I had a bad premonition. It turns out I might have been slightly more worried than I needed to be. The group went into order. Ventov in front because it's a hole somebody dug. So it's Dwarf's job. And he went in. And the rest of the group fanned out behind him. And they started going, they realized there was a tunnel network through. And they followed it. And there was this bad reptilian smell in the air. It was not pleasant. But they're adventurers. This is what they do. And they went into the hole looking for their lost children. And eventually they found a cavern that had been sculpted out that showed a foundation that was sunk into the ground with a hole in it that looked like it had been knocked out. Well now, this is something interesting. So they crawl into it. Because of course you do. And as they went in and looked around, all of a sudden they were ambushed. Because, let's face it, they weren't all that quiet getting up to that hole. So they got into a quick fight with 3 creatures. They kind of look like lizard folk. And lizard folk are a thing in Xayathe. But these actually are a special kind of lizard folk called a Gamithian. Pretty nasty and closer to snakes than reptiles, but they're still humanoid. But they're not Wanti. They're just, vicious creatures. And they tend to chum around with snakes, as these Verdestian vipers that they were with showed. And they also later, some giant vipers. Oh, the group got into this fight. And Haranen went right in. He knows his tactics now. He's got his sword. He is ready to go. He doesn't even bother with a shield. Just long sword, two-handed, starts cutting through things. So does Ventov. Ventov moves up next to him so that he can cover him with his shield, his superior armor class. Things are looking okay for the team. For the most part, the Vipers are in front, so they soak up the fighters, and the Comedians had javelins, and they were throwing javelins at the group. The party has some ranged attacks, of course. We saw being very effective, Glenn with his bow, shooting his bow. Haranen was killing things with every swing. He's powerful, and the snakes weren't particularly tough. But the group really started to have problems when Ventov got nailed a few times by javelins for considerable damage. And also, something else, the Gamithians have an odor to them that causes people to get sluggish and lethargic, so that wasn't fun. But the group worked together and took relatively little damage, while basically putting all of the horrible creatures to the sword. It was another chance to laugh as Vanessa looked for the most wounded and finished them off with dagger and thrown dart, and finished off several wounded creatures. She was continuing on that kill steal thing. Brandel uncorked one of her burning hands, cooking one of the Gamithians pretty well, and then shocking grasping another one, so that was working out fairly well for the group. No, she didn't catch anybody else in the blast, which was good. And of course, Crendon was moving in and trying to do pretty well with his rapier, which is a good weapon. Unfortunately, his armor class isn't the best, and he got bludgeoned down because these things have vicious claws, sharp teeth, and after their javelins, they also have great clubs. Not as big great clubs as, some people might use, but they're still effective weapons. And he got beaten down. So that wasn't good. But the group eventually came back. The thing that happened that really kind of helped Crendon out is he had a GUI reward, which gave him some temporary hit points. So it got him roused up, and he was basically going on glory alone. Eventually, Ventov moved up alongside of him to cover him, and boy, did that make the difference. Putting disadvantage on a foe that is attacking an ally of yours with that defensive fighting technique really can be a huge benefit for the group. And so it proved. The Gamithians were eventually destroyed. The snakes were butchered as well. Yeah, it was worse when the giant ones moved into the fray, but they really couldn't hit anybody. My dice were so bad. And the weird thing was, through the whole of it, even though he was fighting with a two-handed weapon, no shield, could not hit Haranen for anything. He just danced through combat without a scratch. It's crazy. So, the group is in what looks like a quarter wedge of a round floor, possibly. And there were two doors. One they checked was locked firmly, and it's a solid door, too. These aren't weakened, rotted doors. These are tough. So they took the other door and entered into a hallway. Okay. They explored the hallway and found out that it seemed like they were in a round structure, kind of like a tower. At least that's what it looked like from the floor plan. And this hallway was a direct, basically it cut the thing in two. They had examined one quarter, and they saw a door leading into the same room, apparently, that they couldn't get into from the first. And then there was another door opposite that. They went over and tried everything they could to get through the first door, because they really wanted to get into that room, which kind of proved unfortunate because the door opposite it opened, and a bunch of other Gamithians came out and started attacking them. Now, these Gamithians had a strategy. Because they used claws and teeth, the hallway was about 6 feet wide. So they scooted into the same area as the party, using their surprise, and started raking with their claws and teeth, putting the weapon-wielding opponents at a disadvantage. And this especially was felt keenly by Haranen, who uses a longsword, and it's awfully hard to fight with somebody who's right in your face when you've got a longsword. So instead he pulled out the dagger he took from the thief in an earlier encounter. So he was able to defend himself. Behind him was Ventov, and Ventov, even though he was fighting at disadvantage, he was still rolling really well. So what he did was he basically took the axe by the head, and he was punching people with the sharpened bit of it. And it worked. Even though it was not the best way to fight with it, he was doing very effectively with his magical battle axe. Behind him was Vanessa, or Crendon. And Crendon, again, kind of a disadvantage, so instead of using the long rapier, he pulled out a short sword, which was a much more effective weapon. And he was actually doing quite well, and I was having a very difficult time trying to hit him. Partially because, again, Ventov was there protecting. Behind him was Vanessa. And Vanessa, again, trying to attack with her weapons. It was kind of bad angles and everything, but she was able to do some damage. Brandel, shocking grasp. She was just had her shocking grasp up and she was trying to reach, but at disadvantage because of the clustered mess that everybody else was going in and fighting. It didn't help that Glyn moved up alongside and he was jumping in and slashing with his scimitar, trying to get up and participate in the fight, which just clustered the whole thing right up. Well, this was kind of an interesting fight until the Gamithians started to fall. The group is stronger, they're quite good with their weapons. The Gamithians didn't have that many hit points, even though I made it a tougher encounter. Gave them a higher armor class for some, but nope, the group finally just finished them off. One at a time. After one fell, the others moved out to try to get in. Haranen made a choke point of the door, leaving one unable to join his comrades, so he did a one-on-one duel with Haranen while he could. That didn't go very well. Haranen just clove him right through the chest with his sword, and that was it. There was a rich body count the group had. Everybody participated in the fight and did fairly well. Although Vanessa did chuck her sickle out of the fight, so she retreated. That actually helped because her moving out of the fight did allow everybody else to kind of free up and remove some of the disadvantage people were fighting with, which was actually good. She did take a blow attack of opportunity for retreating, but she didn't care and it didn't hit her. Again, charmed lives some people have. So, the group went into this new room that was just abandoned, and this was a slaughterhouse slash feeding area for these things. It's a scene of carnage. And not just animals, there were people in there too that these things had been chewing on. Now, none of them were little girls, so not the children that they went down here for. But even so, it's a heart-wrenching scene. And the only feature in the room, there was a cabinet that was still intact, and then there was a further door. The group went around as the last thing they did that night. They got to search around. They found a really nice suit of armor, although it's smelly and just horrid after all the stuff that's been dumped all over it. They found a key in the cabinet, and they found a new Serric iron longsword. Haranen's like, I paid for mine. Which is true. But it's still a fine weapon, and somebody will get some good use out of it. And Brandel found a Wand of Dying Fire. So that's a great weapon. Again, it's ironic that that's what she rolled, but it's what she got. So the group has found some nice treasures in this dungeon already. The fights haven't been too challenging, although some people are nicked up. And remember, Vanessa doesn't have any more healing. So whatever they do, they're relying on healing potions now, and they don't have the luxury of time to take 1 hour rest to use their hit dice, which they still have up their sleeve, but this is a little too tense for that. So that's where we stand. They are in the Room of Death, and considering their options, they now have a key, and they knew where there was a locked room, so who knows what they'll decide. But I know one thing that I will decide is that I will be here for the next session in 2 weeks, and looking forward to that. This might be the final night of the Darkest Dream, so exciting stuff. Hopefully you've been enjoying this. We have, and until that next session, farewell.